Welcome to Le Weekend, the bonus extended podcast episode for France News Brief. In case you missed one of our dailies, we've put together a convenient way to catch up on the stories from the past week in France, plus additional content about something related to culture, art, history, or current events at the end. If you enjoyed our daily updates, you'll find everything you need right here in a seamless recap of the week's most important headlines. Perfect for those who want to catch up in just one episode, Le Weekend is designed to keep you informed and engaged with a lighter touch at the end. Let's dive in. This is the news for Monday, October 6th. Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu submitted his resignation shortly after forming a new government, saying that the conditions were not right. Left-wing parties and the Republican Party were set to hold meetings today, while the right-wing National Rally called for the dissolution of the National Assembly, as reported by France Info. In related news, France's political paralysis sparked fresh credit rating warnings. Fitch said the highly uncertain political backdrop underscored the limited scope for substantial fiscal consolidation, while S&P Global pointed to analysis published last month that France's government spending at 57% of GDP was the highest of any country it rates globally, as reported by Reuters. French prosecutors opened a probe on Apple's voice assistant Siri following a complaint from a tech researcher. French prosecutors said the investigation of the voice assistant concerns alleged illicit data collection, as reported by Le Monde. Gisèle Pelicot returned to court 1 year after the sensational Mazan rape trial that shocked the nation. Pelicot once again faces one of her alleged attackers, the only one to have appealed his 9-year prison sentence, as reported by France 24. A group of 28 French nationals who were aboard an aid flotilla to Gaza that was intercepted by Israeli forces have been deported and are expected to arrive in Greece today. They are among nearly 200 activists detained by Israel, as reported by RFI. More than 35,000 businesses have declared bankruptcy in France since the beginning of the year. Business failures have already jumped by more than 14% since the beginning of the year under the combined effects of inflation, the cost of financing, and the decline in consumption, as reported by Le Figaro. In related news, ready-to-wear brand X, spelled IKKS, was placed in receivership with more than 1,000 jobs threatened. The units in Spain and Belgium are not included in the proceedings, as reported by Le Figaro. The threatened closing of a famous camembert box manufacturer is being called a tragedy. The Cibem factory is in serious difficulty despite being taken over by Lactalis Group in 2011, as reported by Le Figaro. This is the news for Tuesday, October 7th. After the Prime Minister's resignation, President Macron hinted at snap elections. Macron gave Sébastien Lecornu 48 hours to resolve the crisis, saying he will take his responsibilities if efforts fail. The move was a way of pushing the socialists and conservatives toward compromise, as reported by Le Monde. Former lawyer and minister Robert Badinter will be inducted into the pantheon of French heroes on October 9th. Known for his commitment to abolishing the death penalty in France, he has fought tirelessly for a more humane justice system. Marked by the arrest and deportation of his father, this son of Jewish immigrants has also waged a constant battle against anti-Semitism, as reported by France 24. French railway operator SNCF has reached a key milestone with its new high-speed train TGV M, which is scheduled to enter service around April. After intensive testing, the first production train has entered the real-world testing phase, much delayed as the initial launch was originally scheduled for 2023, as reported by Les Echos. Marseille-based shipping company CMA-CGM welcomed Neoline's two-masted ro-ro ship Neoliner Origin, in which it is the main shareholder. The 440 feet sailing ships will operate a regular monthly transatlantic service for around 10 freight customers, saving 80% in fuel, as reported by Les Echos. This is the news for Wednesday, October 8th. Outgoing Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu is ready to compromise on the deficit reduction target. After several meetings today, he suggested he is willing to reduce the public deficit by half as much as what his predecessor had planned for 2026, if it helps secure a compromise to pass the bill, indicating that the likelihood of a snap election has been pushed back, as reported by Le Monde. The 2025 grape harvest is expected to be among the weakest in history, due in particular to the impact of the August heat wave. Estimates for the 2025 harvest in France have been revised downwards to reach a volume comparable to the already low volume in 2024, as reported by Le Figaro. The U.S. is expected to attend a Paris meeting on the transition of Gaza post-war. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will no longer attend the meeting with European, Arab, and other states, but diplomatic sources said Washington is likely to be represented, as reported by Reuters. A French consumer group sounded the alarm on sugary, ultra-processed dairy products for children. The Food Watch report slammed 10 popular children's dairy products, warning they're overloaded with sugar, salt, fats, and ultra-processed ingredients, putting young consumers' health at serious risk, as reported by RFI. A French-German national is back in France after being released from detention by Iran. The country had been holding the 18-year-old cyclist after arresting him in June on espionage charges, as reported by Reuters. This is the news for Thursday, October 9th. Outgoing Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu said a replacement will be named by Friday. Meanwhile, the Economy Ministry said the 2026 budget will be ready and that France will honor the commitments made to Europe, as reported by Les Echos. The press attacked Meta before the French Competition Authority. The General Information Press Alliance filed a complaint with the Competition Authority against Meta over the issue of neighboring rights, arguing that the American giant's proposed copyright compensation is insulting. The press denounces an abuse of dominant position, as reported by Les Echos. France hosted Arab and Europe ministers for talks on helping Palestinians after the Gaza war. The Foreign Ministry said the Paris meeting is focusing on security, governance, and reconstruction for the Palestinian territories after the war, as reported by Le Monde. The state blocked a contested cross-channel electricity interconnection project. The Seine-Maritime Prefecture refused to issue a concession to use the public maritime domain to the British company Aquend, putting a stop to the cross-channel electricity interconnection project between France and Great Britain led by this company, as reported by Le Figaro. The first residents are moving into what was the Paris 2024 Olympics Athletes Village in the suburb of Saint-Saint-Denis. This new neighborhood straddles the cities of Saint-Denis, Saint-Ouen, and Ile-Saint-Denis, and is set to welcome 6,000 residents and 6,000 employees almost simultaneously, as reported by Le Monde. This is the news for Friday, October 10th. Sébastien Lecornu was reappointed as Prime Minister. The resigning Prime Minister, who had declared his mission complete, was finally reappointed by President Macron on Friday evening. Lecornu said he accepted the appointment out of duty, as reported by France Info. Mexican filmmaker Guillermo del Toro, Netflix, and a Paris Film School united to save stop-motion animation. The partnership is aimed at preserving traditional stop-motion techniques that del Toro calls AI-proof. France's share of foreigners is lower than most EU countries. New statistics show that 6 million foreigners live legally in France, with foreign residents making up just under 9% of the French population in 2024, a proportion that remains below the European Union average of 9.6%, as reported by RFI. Cognac producers asked the EU and French regulators for a 35 to 50 million euro uprooting plan. Burdened by a Chinese anti-dumping investigation launched in response to a European initiative, the cognac industry wrote to Brussels and Paris to demand funding for a plan to remove the brandy from the market worth around 35 to 50 million, as announced on Thursday. Beijing imposed significant restrictions on importers of European brandies, mainly cognac, last year, a measure widely seen as a response to the European anti-dumping investigation targeting Chinese electric vehicles, as reported by Le Figaro. You are listening to Le Weekend, and now that you're all caught up with the main news from the past week, it's time for our bonus story. And today we are talking about cheese and why it made the news this week. The recent announcement that France's last traditional Camembert cheese box factory is on the verge of closure has sent ripples far beyond the cheese aisles of supermarkets, shaking up both the local economy and the sentimental heart of French gastronomic identity. The Saint-Pierre-en-Auge site in Normandy, known as La Cibème, has been crafting the iconic Camembert boxes since 1885, a near mythical stretch of time that mirrors the way cheese itself weaves through France's collective memory. With the factory slated to shut its doors in 2026, the humble box, once an unremarkable part of the cheese-buying ritual, finds itself thrust into the limelight, embodying the struggle to preserve artisanal traditions against the tide of modernization and regulatory change, including looming European Union packaging standards that threaten to ban most non-recyclable food containers by 2030. The wooden box is more than packaging. In France, presentation is almost as important as substance, and for Camembert, the famously creamy, aromatic cheese native to Normandy, its container is made of poplar, a wood renowned for its lightness and strength. The manufacturing process requires precise craftsmanship involving the careful cutting and assembly of pieces of wood, and the box's dimensions are also standardized to accommodate a 250-gram Camembert. The wooden box is entwined with notions of terroir, to which we'll come back later, authenticity, and even the cheese's very maturation. There's a strong belief among makers and devoted eaters, that only the airy, porous wooden box allows for the right amount of airflow, moisture retention, and gradual flavor development. Switch to plastic at your peril, you risk altering the cheese character, rapid heating, condensation, and, some say, even jeopardizing the Appellation d'origine contrôlée label, which strictly regulates where and how Camembert can be produced and packaged. But why does France care so much on a visceral, nearly existential scale about cheese? There's a famous saying, often attributed to Charles de Gaulle, how can you govern a country that has 246 kinds of cheese? While the general may have underestimated, the number now is closer to 1,000 these days, the sentiment rings true. Yes, cheese is food, but also a symbol of France's regional diversity, its penchant for complex rules and joyful exceptions to those rules. This diversity comes from France's unique history of cheese making, which began thousands of years ago but truly flourished in medieval monasteries. Monks developed new approaches, refined recipes, and gave the world treasures like Roquefort, Monster, and Pont-l'Évêque through their quiet, methodical innovations. So let's go back to terroir, which we mentioned in a previous episode. Terroir is a word impossible to fully translate into English. It could perhaps be best translated as the taste of place and know-how. It's the magic that happens when soil, grass, altitude, and microclimate merge with the techniques handed down by generations of farmers. This is why cheeses like Camembert, Comté, or Chavignol taste so singularly of their home, and why French people are fiercely protective about labels like AOC and PDO, Protected Designation of Origin. In fact, these designations mean a cheese must be produced, ripened, and often even packaged within a meticulously defined area. Camembert, for example, is a living expression of Normandy's fields, cows, and climate, right down to the wooden box that's part of the charm, and, some would argue, the flavor. Cheese in France is woven into the fabric of daily life, social rituals, and even economics. The cheese course, usually served after the main course and before dessert, is a non-negotiable staple of family tables, bistros, and formal banquets. This placement before dessert, different to other cultures, allows diners to fully appreciate the complex flavors and textures. As with everything else, there are exceptions, and when cheese is incorporated directly into cooked dishes, such as in quiches, gratins, or tartiflettes, or if served as petit finger food during an aperitif, for example with little goat's cheese on miniature toasts paired with drinks and charcuterie. Otherwise, the cheese platter appears towards the end of the meal, offering a transition from savory to sweet and acting as a social moment for guests to extend their conversation. On average, the French consume nearly 26 kilograms, that's over 57 pounds, of cheese per person each year, far more than any other nation except a few dedicated neighbors like Switzerland. It's emblematic of France's celebration of slowness, conviviality, and pleasure. Few things encapsulate this like the leisurely ritual of slicing into a ripe round of camembert, passing it around to, hopefully, share in the collective joy. Economically, the cheese industry is colossal. France is Europe's second largest producer of cow's milk and churns out over 1.77 million tons of cheese annually, with exports soaring to 3.2 billion euros. That's approximately 3.6 billion US dollars at today's exchange rate in 2024 alone, and continuing to grow. Exports have created a global hunger for French cheese, and regions like Normandy and Brittany depend on dairy to sustain both their economies and their rural communities. Nearly half of France's 46,000 registered dairy farms are family-run enterprises with deep roots in local soil and tradition, collectively supporting over 300,000 jobs. That's everything from the farmers and cheesemakers to the artisans who make packaging, like the endangered Camembert box craftsmen, not to mention restaurant staff, transporters, and specialty shop owners. Cheese also shapes France's image abroad. French cheese conjures visions of quaint markets, bustling fromageries, picnics in lavender fields, and boisterous dinner parties around a long family table. Institutions like the AOC, Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée, help create and protect this image, drawing lines in the sand that have sometimes quite dramatically led to legal battles and cultural standoffs with industrial producers and rival nations. The recent fight to keep mass-produced Camembert from touting itself as made in Normandy is but one example of how fiercely the French defend the integrity of their most prized dairy export. Consider the power of cheese in swaying public opinion or even politics. It's not uncommon for politicians looking to woo rural voters to attend cheese festivals in the Auvergne or Normandy, pledging support for local appellation and denouncing European Union bureaucracy. When proposals to ban wooden cheese boxes appeared on the horizon, it was not just cheese producers, but mayors, regional presidents, and citizens rallying in defense of patrimoine gastronomique, a term that encompasses heritage, culture, and national pride in one tasty package. The book's closure saga touches the nerve of tradition, but also tells a story about people. French cheese, especially iconic varieties like Camembert, has been defined not by faceless conglomerates, but by generations of small producers. Many of the methods used today stem from family recipes passed down from mother to daughter. The first cheese cooperatives were founded by women farmers in the 13th century. Even the industrialization of cheese in the 19th century, kick-started by figures like Charles Gervais and scientific advances like Louis Pasteur's discovery of pasteurization, was guided by a desire to share excellent cheese with more people while still clinging to regional pride and artisanal craft. Interesting anecdotes pepper these stories. Camembert, for example, is said to have helped the French army during World War I, catapulting it to national fame. The cheese also became a favorite of painters and writers. Simone de Beauvoir was photographed enjoying a wedge, and Salvador Dalí mused that soft cheeses inspired his famed melting clocks. Politically, Roquefort was the first food to ever receive AOC status in 1925, a move that set the gold standard for every other cheese and much wine production that followed. Today, the cheese industry is facing unique challenges. Modernization, global trade pressures, and changing consumer habits have all played a role in this latest crisis. New European Union recycling laws push producers towards alternatives like cardboard or plastic, which threaten not just the taste and texture, but also the jobs of those who make the traditional boxes, like the skilled workers at La Cibème, and the very heritage these crafts represent. The move could impact nearly 2,000 jobs directly tied to cheese packaging, compounding pressures already felt from pandemic-related slowdowns and a rapidly shifting global climate. There is still hope. The government is working with dairy unions and packaging associations to secure exemptions for wood-packaged cheeses, arguing that tradition and sustainable sourcing make these boxes essential. Some companies have begun innovating, creating recyclable and compostable versions of the box that preserve the maturation process and aesthetic character prized by cheese lovers. Whether successful or not, these adaptations highlight France's deep resistance to let go of the rituals that make cheese, one of its greatest contributions to the world culinary scene and so profoundly French. So the fate of the Camembert box becomes a microcosm for the tensions shaping French food culture. Tradition versus progress, the urge to modernize versus the obligation to respect history, and always the drive to protect craft from the relentless march of efficiency. Through all these changes, one thing remains: the French dedication to the pleasures of the table. As you contemplate this story, perhaps while turning the box or savoring the creamy core of a camembert, there is an invitation to defend the exquisite chaos of France's fromage, to taste history, to build community, and to remember that even a wooden box can stand as a bulwark against the uniformity of the modern world. If one day the box does disappear, it will mark the end of an era, a small but potent reckoning of just how meaningful cheese and the traditions surrounding it really are. Thank you for listening to Le Weekend, your one-stop destination for everything we covered this past week in France. Catch our daily France News Brief roundups of the main news in France every weekday, wherever you get your podcasts. Stay informed.